will discuss about some of the methodology that we use for doing troubleshooting in Proxy. And likewise, we are going to explore the sysinfo file. Okay, so somehow during the advance, you have seen how to collect the sysinfo file. Now this time we are going to dissect sysinfo file, and let's take a look what are the different information inside the sysinfo that is important, especially for troubleshooting. And next we will move to discuss authentication related issues. And afterwards, we will talk about the DNS related issue. And likewise, we will be looking at SSL related issues. And also, lastly, performance related issues. With performance related issue, we will touch on policy as well. Okay, so that will be our agenda for the day. Now you will have two manuals as well. So you have the lab and likewise the lesson manual. Okay, so you will be using a remote lab. So for those who have been here already, you will notice that the previous lab you are using should be powered off by now. Stop at the status, and one set is now running. You will be using that new set that is running because it is a, though it will be the same in terms of IP and everything, but configuration-wise, there are different sets. So you need to use the new set that is running for the lab. All right. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and start. Okay, so the first module we have is the overview of the diagnostic and troubleshooting. Now, in any form of troubleshooting that you will do, it is important to understand the component or the network setup that you have in your environment, because that is where you are going to find out, for example, where is the proxy is connected to with regards to my network, and also what are the different integration that I am doing with my proxy. So is it connected to a content analysis? Am I using a management center to manage my proxy? Or am I using intelligence service such as geolocation, threat risk level, or content filtering? Okay, and likewise, how many proxy do I have? Okay, am I doing load balancing? So it is important to understand the entirety of the component that constitute your proxy environment so that you can deal with it accordingly. And also, another point to consider when you do troubleshooting is identify what is the client connection method. All right, so find out what is the client connection method. So we have explicit and also transparent. Okay, so because these two has differences, explicit and transparent, so find out how is your user connected to proxy. Are they explicit or transparent? So for explicit, you do understand that the destination would be the proxy IP, okay, and transparent, the destination will be the OCS. So when you do troubleshooting, these two have major differences, okay? Likewise, try to find out how is your proxy physically connected to the network. Though shown here it's only inline, and probably and inline is one of the least used type of physical deployment because it is only for small environment and for testing. The two mostly or widely used type of physical deployment is your virtually inline and likewise out of path. So virtually inline is used for transparent or large number of user base. So and likewise your out of path is used for explicit, So understand how is your proxy connected to network. Is it virtually inline or is it out of path? Because it will greatly help you when you do troubleshooting. Okay, and besides that, okay, also find out what are the important metrics that you should pay attention with your proxy. So somehow we saw this slide on the advanced, but there are several important metrics to watch in proxy, especially when you are doing troubleshooting. So one of it is your CPU utilization. Okay, CPU is by far the most important metric that you should watch in proxy when you are doing troubleshooting. Besides CPU, you will also need to pay attention with memory, okay, and memory pressure, and also the client or the connection count. So we have an advanced URL, one of that advanced URL you use when you do the advanced course. So where you can see client connections. And another very important is the throughput. Okay, so whenever you do troubleshooting, you need to find out what is the model of your proxy. And likewise, the specs in terms of throughput. Okay, so because when you know the throughput of your proxy, you have to look at how much traffic your proxy is pushing currently or receiving in the network. If the traffic is more than the rated throughput of that specific proxy, then definitely you will have issues. Okay, this is not something that is really need to worry about, but of course, if you have a faulty disk, then you have also major issues. So we will look into each and every one of this, especially the CPU and memory, throughput not so, and connection counts. But what I'm going to do is during the sysinfo module, I will look deep into the sysinfo and show you how you can find out if you are dealing with disk-related issue. Okay? But first thing first, let's discuss the CPU troubleshooting. Okay? So now when you have high CPU, right, the first thing you need to find out, of course, is what is causing the high CPU. Right? That's the first question you're going to ask yourself. So in Proxy, we have what we call CPU monitoring. Okay, so we monitor what's going on with the CPU, and we are able to show you the breakdown of the different components, right, that is involved why your CPU is high. Okay, it is important that we actually capture the snapshot of your CPU utilization every hour. All right. Now, CPU monitor is disabled by default, okay, because you will only use it when you are trying to do troubleshooting, okay, because if you are going to turn on CPU monitor, it will add up to 2 to 5% additional CPU utilization depending on model. So the question is, are you going to run CPU monitor if your current CPU utilization is about 90%? The answer for that is yes. You still need to run the CPU monitor even though you are seeing a very high CPU utilization. The reason is you will not be able to find out what component is causing your CPU to go up if you will not run this. Anyway, your CPU is already high, so it is important to find out what are the different components that are using your CPU. So with that, how do we invoke CPU monitor? So as you can see here, we have an advanced URL under Diagnostics. Okay, so in Proxy, you can make use of the advanced URLs to, in fact, run the CPU monitor. So one of it is under your web UI. So you can just bring up the web UI. So it is under Diagnostic. okay, /CPU monitor /statistics. Right, let's log in first. Okay, so over here, you can start your CPU monitor. Okay, in fact, you can also start the CPU monitor inside this info. Okay? So if you're going to sysinfo /HTML, okay, so the HTML version of sysinfo, you can actually run the CPU monitor inside it. Okay, but this one is slower, so I do not recommend it, even though you can. Right, as you can see, it's still loading. Now, besides the web UI, there is another way to run the CPU monitor, and that is to the CLI. Now, at times, when the CPU utilization is already very high, let me just close this. If your CPU utilization is already very high, the web UI may be slowing down already. All right, it will slow down because your CPU is already reaching very, very high. And even though the proxy will still spare some CPU cycle for the management console, but you will feel that it is already slowing down. Okay, so one way to perform the CPU monitor is using your CLI, which is faster. So you just go to your CLI, right, show advanced URL, and then just go to same location, Diagnostics /CPU _ monitor, and then statistics. All right, so let's see. Or you can just Diagnostics /CPU _ monitor. Never mind about it. Statistics. Okay. So at the moment, the CPU monitor is not running, as what you can see here, right? But you can run the CPU monitor by, instead of statistics, you just put start. Okay. So CPU monitor has already started. Okay, then you go back to statistics, then you should be able to see later on what's going on. Now, at this point, my proxy is not receiving anything, right? That is why you don't see a high CPU usage at this point, because it's not receiving anything. It's what to expect if you run a CPU monitor. Okay, you will expect to see what we call CPU monitor component. Okay, so the different components that involve CPU monitoring. So let's go ahead and just try if I can send traffic to my proxy. Let's just make this browser a bit small so it will not slow down my remote desktop. Okay. Let's see. Let me see if I'm pointing this to. Okay, so it is pointing to my proxy. Let's say some heavy website. All right, let's try. Okay, let's just try to access anyhow. Okay, show. So we have some traffic there. Let's take a look at the statistics. So now we are seeing a what we call component. Okay, so it shows here that my CPU is 100%. Okay, but this is something that you need to worry about if this is persistent. Okay, but if it is not persistent, right, which is just a spike, it is normal because you are trying to access the website, right, simultaneously all together, and we're generating about 21 connections and 21 sessions. So since this proxy is a very small proxy, maximum concurrent client worker for this proxy is only about 25, right? So there is a spike of the CPU here, 100%, which is just a spike, okay? If I refresh this, this will go away, all right? So as you can see, it goes away. It only has about 8% right now. So it is normal, but if you think, if you do the CPU monitor and you saw that it is constantly 100% for like several hours already, then there's something that you need to worry about already, okay? So let's talk about the different components. So this is what you saw here, right? SSL, TCP, miscellaneous, SSL and cryptography, HTTP and FTP, policy evaluation. So what is this all about? Now, the first one, SSL, actually anything pertaining to SSL, SSL2K key, handshakes, SSL and cryptography, that is all related to SSL interception. Okay? So as you notice, SSL interception is in fact resource intensive. And you can see that if the key size is huge, 2K, you notice that it takes up huge amount of CPU utilization. So, but that is not persistent, all right? And remember that the proxy is also caching certificates, right? So we can go ahead and refresh these pages. But hopefully it will not slow down my remote desktop. Okay, let's try to refresh these pages here. All right, and then let's try to statistics. So you notice that we are not hitting that very high CPU utilization again. Okay, and that is because the proxy also has some mitigating factors. So once you access the website, you return to that website, we will perform certificate caching. Okay, so we don't have to emulate the certificate every time. So as you can see, the CPU is pretty normal. But still, SSL is taking up some CPU utilization. Okay, so let's talk about every component that we see here. All right? So first up, HTTP and FTP. So this is quite self-explainable. Basically, if you are sending proxies so many HTTP or FTP connections and overwhelms the proxy, then you will see this very high. Nowadays, because of the majority of the web traffic is HTTPS, you are not really unlikely, but it is not very common to see HTTP and FTP component going up in terms of CPU usage. Okay? But what you would commonly see is SSL and cryptography. So SSL and cryptography pertains to SSL interception. So when you see that this is very high, constantly very high, not going down at all, then this is something to do with SSL interception. So you need to look at your SSL settings. TCP/IP, this is at the TCP stack of the proxy, because HTTP or HTTPS or FTP are all TCP, right? They are all TCP. So because they are all TCP, it takes up TCP stack in proxy. Okay? There are only about 16,000 simultaneous TCP connections per TCP per destination port in proxy. So if that is maxed out, then obviously user will be queued. All right? So if you see high TCP/IP, then you have to look at the TCP stack. We have an advanced URL for that because TCP has different states, right? So you have to pay attention to that. Now, next one here is the policy. Okay? So what about the policy? So as the name implies, the proxy is using so much of its CPU due to policy evaluation. Okay, so when you see this, in fact, it tells you that why that the proxy is taking up so much of the CPU just to process the policy. That is basically what this policy here tells you. So what do you need to do? You need to check your policy. Any changes on the policy recently, right? And maybe you can find out. Next, you have here DNS service. So if for some reason the DNS is slowing down, and when the proxy performs queries, the DNS is not responding back in a timely manner, it will increase CPU utilization due to DNS. So what you just need to do then is find out your DNS or check the proxy's DNS setting. So as you can see here, the CPU monitor, in fact, points you to where or what causes the CPU to go up. Okay? Besides that, we have also here object store. So what is about the object store? So the object store pertains to your caching. Okay? Pertains to your cache. So remember that one of the components of the proxy is the storage subsystem. So if, for example, you are having issue with your disk, okay, then object store CPU component will go up. So this is related to disk. All right? And lastly, you have here miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is typically due to some of the things like the updating of the content filtering, miscellaneous stuff. Also, you will see here sometimes access logging will cause CPU utilization to go up. So if the proxy is in fact performing access log during heavy network traffic or heavy volume of web traffic, it could increase CPU utilization, in some deployment. Right? That is why access log is recommended to be sent to the server during wee hours. Okay? So that is basically what you will be expecting for CPU. Right? So we will take a look at how to troubleshoot some of this one by one. All right? So as I said, two ways for you to run CPU monitor. One is through the web UI. Another one is to the CLI. So if the web UI is slowing you down because of high CPU, then you can make use of the CLI as an option for you to run your CPU monitoring. Okay. Likewise, if, for example, multiple CPU component is high, let's say policy, TCP/IP, and likewise your SSL and cryptography, all three of them is high, it tells you that the proxy, and it is constantly high for several months now, like it is not really saturating the entire CPU. So let's say your CPU utilization is now during peak hours, let's say it hovers to 80%, and you are monitoring it for several months now, and it seems like this policy, TCP/IP or SSL, if you turn on SSL, is using most of your CPU. That is an indication that the proxy may already be under spec. So maybe you have deployed the proxy many years ago, and number of user increased, number of policy increased, right? So eventually that would max out the maximum specs of the proxy that you are using. So you will notice that if all three of this, policy, TCP/IP, or SSL and cryptography is always showing high CPU, so you need to upgrade your proxy to a higher spec or you need to add additional proxy in the mix. Okay? So CPU monitor is important that we actually collect them in proxy. Okay? So if you are going to take a look at the proxy, the management console, so under maintenance, service information, snapshots. So this snapshot over here, which we collect every hour, it includes the CPU utilization every hour interval. So in case that you are having issue with CPU, okay, utilization very high, and you want to capture it because it happens quite often, you can in fact create a new snapshot. So you can say CPU, let's say CPU monitor, and you would want to edit this first. And what you can do is you can put in the diagnostic. You need to put the exact advanced URL, diagnostics / CPU monitor / statistics. Okay, and maybe you want to capture this every 5 minutes. Okay, so you are capturing the statistics every 5 minutes, and you need to enable it. Click OK, right, and apply. Okay, so later on, you can go back here and download the entire snapshot. So at the moment, there isn't. Okay, we have some of it already. Oh, because we have been running CPU monitor just now. Right. All right, so this is the diagnostic. So as you can see, a snapshot of diagnostic, CPU monitor statistics. You can download all of this. Okay, so it collects even the previous CPU statistics. This one is the sysinfo. So you can download and you can examine it. So you can view this one, for example. And at this point, the CPU monitor is very low. So this one captures at edit, view snapshot. So this is still, or this is the stat, or this is the CPU monitor. So CPU monitor we don't have yet. This is the stats here, the existing one, which is this one. This one. So since we turned on CPU monitor just now, here, okay, we have one now. So this one. All right, so we're expecting another one later on after 5 minutes, and we can take a look at that. Okay, so that is what you can do, and then you can download this and examine the CPU monitor every 5 minutes interval. Okay, so it will create this file here every 5 minutes, and it will, you can download it all. All right, so let's say number of takes, let's say 100. Okay. The number of takes. All right, so that is the CPU monitor. Okay, so here are the advanced URLs there. As you can see earlier, I showed you. The advanced URLs is updating every 5 seconds. So the output of that advanced URL, so if you are going to launch the advanced URL instead of this CLI, of course, the update of this is every 5 seconds also. Now, when you run this command again, right, so this is the 5 second interval. So it will again update after 1 second, So 1 second later, it will show you a different value, right? Or here, 2 seconds should be passed and show you another value. Okay, but so it is updating every 5 seconds. Okay, so that is your CPU monitor, right? You can basically run the CPU monitor if you see a very high CPU utilization. Okay. So next one, I'm going to talk about the memory management. Okay, memory. So with memory, another important metrics that you should watch in Proxy is the memory. Besides, of course, your CPU, probably one of them very important is the CPU. Next is the memory. There are only a few reasons why you will see a very high memory pressure. Okay, that is known to us. One is if you have a memory leak. So if there is a memory leak going on in the proxy, then of course you will see a high memory pressure. Another one is if there are only software bugs. So if, let's say, there is a software bug in Proxy that eats up your memory utilization, that is another reason why your memory could go up. And another is due to some configuration that is not working, also will create high memory. Okay? Let's say you configure Proxy of some of the features that the Proxy have, and for some reason it is not working due to the external dependencies. All right? It will also create a high memory utilization, especially for notifications, because notifications are sitting at the memory of the Proxy. All right? So we'll take a look at some of that in a short while. So how do we take a look at the memory utilization of the Proxy? So at the graphical user interface itself, you will see here how much memory is being used. So, for example, over here, how much is the committed memory out of the maximum memory? So it's 25% usage, and you have 10% usage. As you can see here, majority of the memory is not actually used by the system itself only. It is also used by the cache. So in fact, we are using the memory as a location to store the object cache. Okay? So we store the object cache in the memory also besides the disk. Okay? In fact, most of the memory is used for caching. Okay, so this is committed to the system, used by the application about 15%. Committed cache buffer, so very small, right? And reclaimable cache buffer, 64%. So this is basically can be used for cache, about 64%, which is not much traffic on this proxy, so that's why we're not using it right now, so much of it. So it is this much free, 10.2% is still free. But you can use this for caching up to 64%. Up to 2.5 gigabytes of the memory can be used for caching. But at the moment, it is not being used that much because, as you can see, it is only about 12.4 MB. Total memory free is this. So cache buffer, total free is only cache buffer is only 0.3%. So very small amount of memory is being used. Besides that, we have also advanced URL for the memory. All right. So for memory, okay, let's just let that. Okay, so let's see if we can system/memory. Okay. So this one is an advanced URL which you can invoke in the CLI. Let me just expand this a bit. Okay, so this system memory gives you an idea also of how much memory is installed, how much is being used by the system image, right? Cache buffers being used, total memory free. So total memory free is this, right? Reclaimable is this. So if the total memory is like almost zeroing, there's no more memory left, right? Okay. So that you can also use the CLI to see the memory utilization. Besides, of course, the web UI, that's what you can see here. Okay. So this is advanced URL using the web UI. Also, another point, another place you can see for memory is the sysinfo file, right? Or the what we call TM statistics. So the TM statistics, which is this over here, can also be invoked in the CLI. Okay? Now, what you would want to see over here, this is very good if you are going to find out if there are any memory leakage, because it shows 2 minutes, 1 hour to 1 day. You can collect this and create a graph for this, and you will see over time what is causing the memory leak. Because memory leak is not something that happens in just one instance. So it happens over time. So if you're collecting these statistics over time, then you will see what application is actually eating your memory. So you have another advanced URL here you can use, tm/statistics. Okay. All right. So this one. Now there are two types here. We have linear bytes and physical bytes. What you would want to take is the physical bytes. Okay. So what would you want to take here is the physical byte. Okay, so this is the established connection. Let's scroll down a bit more. I want to show you the physical byte. Let's expand this a bit. Okay, so this is still linear bytes. This is 1 hour interval. We need to scroll down a bit more. Okay, so this is 1 day now, so we are almost done with the linear byte. So here is the physical byte. So the physical bytes every 2 minutes interval. So what would you want to do is you need to capture this, all right, because it shows you what is the application involved. This one is miscellaneous authentication. So this is 2 minute interval. You can capture that, import this in a Excel sheet, and then you can graph this, right? You can graph this. So there is a linear byte in 2 minutes. So this one is 1 hour interval now. Okay, so this is 1 hour interval. Not much because this proxy has been up only for several hours. Okay, then obviously the 1 day interval, you don't have that much of the data, of course. Okay, so this is a 1 day interval. No data yet because this not has been up for like 1 day yet. So you can see here the different application involved. And then once you graph this, you'll notice which one of these applications, if you take every 2 hours, which one of these applications is showing a continuous increasing value. And that is an indicative that you may be suffering from a memory leak. Okay? Now, there are several things that you can do for that to immediately alleviate memory leakage. One is of course, because memory utilization do not persist on reboots. Okay, all the application that is assigned for the memory is in fact volatile. So meaning to say, if the proxy is being rebooted, the proxy will release all the application from the memory because it is a volatile portion of the memory that they are using. So it will solve your memory problem, memory pressure, right, when you reboot the proxy. But, of course, when you reboot the proxy, you have certain degree of downtime, okay? So what you need to do is you need to, in fact, capture the memory first before you reboot the proxy. Because reboot is a temporary solution. All right? So typically what we can do is you can restart and then abrupt. The restart abrupt command will dump this memory information in the disk. All right? So that we can collect it afterwards. Okay? So that is two things, right? One is the one is the memory leak. So memory leak, you can use the TM statistics to find out what application is leaking memory. Okay? Another one is the software bug. So if you have a high CPU, you try to take a look at the statistics, generate a graph, you don't know what's causing it really, then it could be a bug. So bug, definitely you cannot solve it on site. It could be solved by an upgrade of the firmware. Okay? And what will happen if you have a very high memory utilization? So basically, the proxy monitors the health. So if you go to statistics here, maintenance, and you go to system and statistics, health monitoring. If you actually click this out here, it will take you to health monitoring. As you can see, all the important components is being monitored. Okay, so if you set threshold, these are all the thresholds there. For memory, warning is 90%. Critical is 95%. Same with CPU utilization. The proxy will log this by default. So for CPU utilization, if the CPU utilization is very high, it will translate to a performance issue, meaning to say the user will complain internet is slow. For memory utilization, it is immediately you will lose internet access if it reaches 80%. Because at 80% of memory, the proxy will go into a TCP acceptance regulation mode. So in TCP acceptance regulation mode, when the memory pressure is 80%, at this point, when it goes to TCP acceptance regulation mode, the proxy will start to accept new TCP connection. So if no new TCP connection is accepted by the proxy at 80% of memory, then no user is able to access the internet. Okay, and that is for memory. 80%, no user can access the internet. For CPU, even though you're hitting 80%, maybe 85, 90%, you can still access the internet, but a bit slow. But for memory, it will stop accepting TCP connection. So as you can see here, the warning threshold for memory is 90%. But at 80%, it goes into a TCP acceptance regulation mode. And so you may be wondering, why is the warning 90 when 80 I cannot access the internet already? Because typically, the proxy is able to alleviate in such condition. It alleviates itself in such condition. Meaning to say it's able to fix, it's able to recover from that situation without much of the user noticing it. That's why it's in that scenario. But if, let's say you are not happy with this, you want to be notified and logged, then you can always edit this. You can always change the warning threshold to, let's say, 80% or 75%. Right? You can change the notification if you want to. So if you configure SNMP, then you can do, or email. Right? You can change this to 80% so that you will be notified at 80% for memory. Because at 80%, it goes to a TCP acceptance regulation mode. All right? So, two things we talk about that causes memory. One is software bug. Nothing we can do about that. It has to be fixed, software. So, software bug is typically can be fixed by upgrading it to a new version. Another one is memory leak. So we can find if there is a memory leak by looking at the PM statistics, and then we can generate a graph to find out what application is causing the leakage. Memory leak can also be caused by a software issue or a bug. So if you find out if you're having a memory leakage, then you need to escalate that to support. So these two. Besides these two, there is one more. Okay? Another one is the notifications. Right? If the proxy is having notification issue, then it will consume also your memory. So for example, let's say you can let's configure something in Proxy. Let me just add another DNS. Let's say just 10.10.2.25 apply. All right, and my health check. So we talked about health check yesterday. Health checks. So this will be monitored now. Right, 10.10.2.25. So what I'm gonna do for this is, let's say we will override the notification, and let's say we are going to email. Okay, so notify for each IP, notify in transition to sick, notify on healthy. That is what we'll do for this. All right, so let's apply this. And then, so when notification is enabled, of course, you need to configure where you want to send a notification, right? So you can send a notification, but first, you need to configure a server IP address. So let's say 10.10.2.100. There is no 10.10.2.100. Supply this. And then let's just say student 10, example.com. Right? So that is where we send the notification. So there isn't any student 10, there isn't any 10.10.2.100, which will fail the notification because the server is down. The SMTP server is down, right? So because we have an issue with the DNS server, and based on the settings that we configured, it should notify you via an email. Okay? So, in doing so, the proxy should send you an email. But then, this server, 10.10.2.100, is not a mail server. It is a fictitious server, just to simulate that, notification will not be sent out. So, that is one case where your memory utilization could go up. Because imagine if you are having a major issue in proxy, all right, or some issue that you are configuring the proxy to send an email, and that the email could not be sent because the mail server is down for some reason, then it will consume CPU because memory. Okay, it will consume memory because every cycle, okay, of notification being sent, every notification being sent, it consumes 4 cycles of the memory. All right, so that is what's going to happen. And so as you can see here, we have a health warning now, and based on this, it should send an email to this. But when the proxy will try to connect to the mail server, it will show a down mail server. Okay, and later on, the event log will in fact show information here that your mail server is down. But because we only looking at a very small amount of traffic here on this lab proxy, it may not trigger high memory utilization. But what I'm showing you here is a scenario where the high memory pressure could happen due to a notification. Okay? So we'll just try to see if that is going to happen later. All right? Okay, now let me take a look here. If okay. Okay, so we ought to do 2 labs using event log to investigate memory, as well as packet capture for high CPU. Okay, so let's try do this lab. We just stop